We're going to start this with this being a hearing. And so we're going to open the hearing on SB 169, which is prohibiting mobile home park landlords from limiting a tenant's access to communications and video service. So with us is Nick Myers, Assistant Revisor. Nick, welcome to the committee.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and committee members, and to all of you online. So committee, Senate Bill 169, as the chair said, does deal with the Mobile Home Parks Residential Landlord and Tenant Act. So I'm going to start with current law. So currently in this statutory scheme, the law prohibits a landlord of a mobile home park from imposing any conditions that restrict the tenant in the choice of the seller of a fuel, furnishings, goods, services, which is, you're going to see that's kind of the change in the bill, or mobile homes, unless the condition is reasonably necessary to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the tenants. So that's current law. So what this bill is doing is Senate Bill 169 would amend a statute within that Mobile Home Parks Residential Landlord and Tenant Act to specify that those services that the law states includes cable television, communications, broadband, and telecommunication services. So therefore, what that would do is it would prohibit a landlord of a mobile home park from imposing conditions that would restrict a tenant's access or the access to or the choice of any such services. So a landlord could not restrict a tenant from choosing to receive communications, broadband, telecommunications, or cable television services. And Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to stand for any questions. This bill would take effect on July 1, 2025 if it is enacted.
Thank you, Nick. Committee, got any questions? Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I do know, or I'm guessing we still have a few services for telecommunications that are carrier of last resort. I'm not sure if that's true or not, and then I'm wondering if that can be a restriction if there is a carrier of last resort.
So within federal law, that carrier of last resort obligation, that would require, I mean, it would. I wonder if that operates in a similar fashion to what this would do with respect to the telecommunication services for a carrier of last resort, to where the landlord couldn't restrict a tenant from receiving phone service. This would go a little beyond that to state that a landlord couldn't restrict a tenant from receiving broadband, cable, telecommunications services, and choosing which service they would like to receive.
So, Mr. Chair, my concern would be if it is within an area that has carrier of last resort, I would not want the opportunity to receive other carriers that are not authorized within that district. But I have to think more about this.
Well, I think in that carrier of last resort scenario that you're bringing up, that imposes a duty upon a telecommunications carrier. Well, if they are a carrier of last resort designated by federal law and then designated by the State Corporation Commission as a carrier of last resort, they would have to be the one to provide telecommunications service upon request of any person within their territory, within that carrier of last resort territory. Now, competitive carriers can still operate. Competitive carriers just would not be required to extend a line to reach somebody upon request. Only the person that is designated as the carrier of last resort would be. And that's probably a good point with this bill. This bill only pertains, we had some questions on the House side relating to this. This bill only pertains to the landlord's action to prohibit a tenant from receiving certain services in a mobile home park. This bill does not dictate that a provider of broadband services lay a line to the mobile home park to provide services there. I mean, that's all going to be dependent upon that entity's wishes and whether it makes financial sense to do so.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Thompson, I think you're online. Good afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much. Thank you. I think Nick may have just answered my question, but for example, somebody is way back in the back of a mobile home park and they want Google Fiber, for example, and they can convince Google Fiber to, dig the trench and get it to their mobile home, then the landlord cannot stop them from doing so. Is that correct?
That's exactly what this bill is doing. Yes. So if Google Fiber does wish to lay that line to the area and serve the tenants in a mobile home park, this bill would prohibit the landlord from restricting that service within the mobile home park.
But if they tore up in the process, tore up some landlord's land around other tenants, would who would be responsible? Would it be Google Fiber? Would it be um, the tenant who had the line laid to pay for any damages?
I think that would be just kind of what happens with in the current regime. I think Google Fiber would be on the hook to repair any damage that they caused and restore land if they're digging land up or laying lines there.
Okay. Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions? Nick, I might ask you, within the scope of home rule, does that play with this?
No, not exactly not in any way that I'm seeing right now. Again, this is only pertaining to a landlord's decision or an action to prohibit a communications or broadband or telecommunications service from extending services to their tenants. Franchise ordinances and stuff like that within cities, this wouldn't really necessarily affect that as the bill is drafted.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? If not, thank you, Nick. Okay, we'll move into proponents oral. We have Ethan Kaplan, General Counsel and Director of Broadband Advocacy, Idea Tech. Ethan, welcome to committee.
Yes.
Are you on?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be in front of you, Chair Fagg, Vice Chair Peterson, and distinguished members of this committee. I've already provided testimony, and I do not want to bore you with just reciting that testimony. I think the revisor did a great job answering the questions that you had, and I'm happy to elaborate on those and do so. But first, I want to just state that what this does is essentially this modification. It's a clarification. What we have found at Idea Tech is that as we have laid broadband, we've laid around 6,000 miles throughout Kansas. We run into certain issues that when we look to statute to determine what our rights are versus what property rights are, or private property rights are, there seems to be some muddling, especially when you're dealing with things of laying fiber across, as in this case, a mobile home park, where if you read the statute as it's written, it allows the tenants to choose services. Those services include fuel and other essential services, but it also encompasses services such as broadband. And again, this is an interpretation, and which was why we want some clarification. Based on our and the state's goal over the last decade or so, we're really trying to expand broadband and telecommunications throughout Kansas to people so that it helps with all the remedies that broadband does, such as telehealth and childcare and other things. And so what we're trying to do is based on issues that we've seen, whereby we will be contacted by a tenant of a mobile home park who will want access to our services. We will then attempt to deliver that, and we're told that the tenant is denied that access because the mobile home park does not want us crossing their private property. When you look at the statute as it's written, it's different from the standard residential and landlord tenant act, and that's one thing that we did not, I guess, look at changing at this session. because this seems to be more clear. We've actually talked with another provider, and they agree that they didn't have any issues with this as well. But really what it does is allow clarification of the word choose or choosing of the tenant's rights, and prevents a landlord from being able to prevent that access. I do want to answer Senator Thompson's question as far as, I believe he asked about the property damage. Just as we deploy across private property in providing our services, we are responsible for putting that property back to the way it was, or paying costs for any damage. So in this instance, the owner of the mobile home park will not be responsible for any damage. Additionally, we do have options to get the lines to the certain mobile homes, one being obviously aerial. If there, for some reason, even the, let's say the mobile home tenant doesn't want us going underground, then yes, that's also an option. We usually use vibratory plow, which does not disturb much. It only goes a couple inches under the ground. That again is be something that we would deal with the landlord or the mobile home park tenant on any property damage. I do want to say that, you know, one thing that was brought up was the home rule and dealing with cities and franchise agreements. There's obviously some of the issues we've encountered are outside the cities, and so we don't have any sort of franchise rights to be able to utilize the county. The other thing is we don't want to, based on the way the bill's written now, we don't want to bother with the cities or the counties with having to interpret state statute or get involved in these in a civil dispute, which again we feel could be remedied by the simple clarification. I think what this does is essentially just codifies into law what it should be, which is that a tenant has a right to choose its broadband provider, that a landlord cannot restrict a tenant to choosing only one. Again, that's one of the counter arguments that I believe was brought up to the House committee during our testimony was that it's already covered under the MTEs and the FCC. However, that only applies to certain providers and not to the landlords themselves. And here we're dealing not with just a central building, we're dealing with a park which encompasses a number of different tenants with different mobile homes. So again, I want to thank you for allowing me to appear, especially remotely today, since apparently Snowmageddon happened last night. But I am happy to stand for any questions and look forward to doing so.
Okay, we're not under a timeline today, so we got any questions, committee? Senator Peck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When it comes to mobile home park tenants, I see, and I didn't see it in the bill, so I apologize if it's in here, but I see three scenarios. One, if you own a mobile home and you move it on to the land of the mobile home, you're renting the land from the mobile home park to have your mobile home. Two would be someone else owns the mobile home, not the mobile home park, and you're renting from that individual. Or three would be the mobile home park actually owns the mobile home and you're renting from the mobile home park. So you're a tenant if you have your own mobile home, you're renting the land or the space, or you're renting the mobile home from someone else. So does this cover tenant in a broad sense, no matter what scenario I just brought up?
I believe that it would be the same as it's written now, which is that the tenant has a right to choose, just as it would the other services that are already currently listed. I do feel that, you know, when a tenant comes in, it's similar to if someone's subletting a property or renting a property, just a single home. You know, it's going to be up to that tenant, obviously, to get permission to get that line into their home if it's not their property. So this is just, again, it'd be similar to how they would access these other services that are listed. I don't believe, as it's written, there'd be issues with if there's another or a competitive service provider of fuel or the other things that are there, if they would be able to restrict them from coming across the property. I think it would basically be all encompassing on what a tenant's rights would be.
Well, Mr. Chairman, maybe it's a question for staff and maybe even after the committee. But again, I see tenants in 3 different lights here. And if I own a mobile home park and the mobile home, I may not want holes drilled in the side of my mobile home just because the tenant wants a box set or something like that. So may not necessarily deal directly with this legislation, but I was just curious about that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Myers, would you like to comment on that?
Yes, Senator Peck, I think that's a good point. And so we've got two things in this Mobile Home Parks Residential Landlord and Tenant Act that kind of pertain to your question. One is the definition of tenant, but then 2, the statute 5825-101 says that this Mobile Home Parks Residential Landlord and Tenant Act shall govern the rental of mobile home space in mobile home parks. But when both the mobile home and the space used to accommodate the mobile home are rented or leased by the same landlord, the Residential Landlord and Tenant Act shall apply, and not the Mobile Home Parks Act.
Okay. Got a follow-up? You okay? All right. Senator Holscher, you're on WebEx. You're next. Thank you. Are
Thank you,
there?
Mr. Chair.
Yep.
Yeah, Ethan, I do have a question.
Sure.
And through this bill, if I'm understanding correctly, it would allow more open or mandatory access in terms of what's trying to be accomplished here. But my question is this, wouldn't this kind of blur the lines in terms of a property owner's ability to ensure that the providers have the right permits, licensing, et cetera?
Well, I believe that would be a requirement. And again, I think that would fall to the service provider to have that. And I think that would definitely be, if you look at, there's already built-in restrictions and one in the statute itself being reasonableness. They can, even though they'd be able to choose, there still has to be, if the landlord finds that there's these issues with reasonable safety, health, or any of those items, then it's still protected and we wouldn't be able to provide. So I think that would fall under those safety guidelines. Therefore, if we didn't have a permit, it might be falling under, that's a reasonable reason to not allow access.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Senator Warren, good afternoon. You're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ethan, for your testimony. I see this bill as trying to balance the private property rights of the mobile home park owner and tenants in the mobile home park. You had mentioned the rights of a tenant to be able to access broadband, and is that right? Is that written somewhere, or what do you reference when you say the right?
Well, I believe it's as we are a public utility, us personally in telecommunications, I believe, that is becoming more of a necessity. I believe at this day and age, a tenant, just as everyone should be entitled to have, broadband or internet, I believe that's the way things have been going, especially the past couple of years, as you've noticed through the COVID and the pandemic. I think what we're dealing with now is that when you do not allow a tenant to have broadband or access to that, you're really depriving them of their ability to communicate with the outside world. So that's what I mean with as far as rights, as whatever's been conveyed to a telecommunications provider under the KCC or things of that nature. That's basically what we're talking about.
Sure. And, of course, broadband access is important. So, is there something, maybe this is a question, so when the mobile home tenant who has asked a carrier to come in across the private property of the mobile home park owner and lay some cable and things, when that tenant moves out, can the landlord ask that the provider come remove the equipment that's on the private property there?
Yes, I believe they can, because it's basically what they're doing. I mean, for one thing, I think it's an extreme selling point, obviously, for a mobile home park owner to say, "Hey, we have access to broadband." It's also an extreme selling point for a landlord to say, "We have access to, competitively priced broadband and not just one." That obviously helps the tenant. So if a landlord wants to or desires to get rid of our services because maybe the next tenant doesn't want it, then yes, they should have that right. And just as a resident of a single home or any other resident may ask for us to remove our lines or our equipment, we would have to do that.
And I don't want to loosely throw around the term rights because,
Sure.
private property rights are kind of the foundation of our government. And
Sure.
so when you say the right to have it removed, is that written in statute somewhere that the provider would have to have the expense of removing that?
Well, I can't tell you whether it is right now. What I could say is essentially in our practice, and again, we balance, just as you mentioned, we have this delicate balance of dealing with property rights, and obviously it'd be horrible business sense um, to make enemies of certain properties for not doing that. Again, if someone is asked, I can just speak from my Diatex experience. If someone has asked us to come in and remove our line for some reason, we're going to do it, and we'll be responsible for the payment of that. Whether that needs to be or is in a statute elsewhere, I don't know. All I know is that based on our experience in our practice, we would cover that cost. We wouldn't charge them.
And Mr. Chair, thank you for the indulgence, and Ethan as well. If I might, just one more question.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yes.
So a tenant in a mobile home park does not own the land like a single family residence does in a subdivision. And I don't know, but some restrictive covenants and subdivisions used to prohibit, you can't have a satellite dish in your backyard, or you can't have a dish network satellite attached to the side of your house within certain lines of sight. And so if a single family resident um, unit in a subdivision wanted to have a provider, dig up from the uh, put lines to the single family house across other people's private property in the subdivision. Um, is that at all related? Or I don't think you would be able to do that, but you would be able to do that in this instance for a tenant across another person's private property?
Well, I believe what would happen. Oh, what I would believe would happen is that obviously the landlord and tenant would have to discuss that. That would be something that they would have to
Well,
agree
not
to.
not
Yes.
not according to this bill. It's the tenant would have the opportunity to do it regardless of what the landlord says.
Well, I think if you like down farther, I think where it says B, it's basically saying that they can't deprive them from access unless such condition is reasonably necessary to protect the health, safety, or welfare of the mobile home tenants. Uh, but it does say that the landlord may impose reasonable requirements designed to standardize methods of connection and hookup. And basically, if you look at C, then it says that the landlord and tenant may agree in writing that the tenant is to perform the landlord's duties as far as making repairs, maintenance, alterations, remodeling. So I think it's sort of built in there that there can be restrictions. We're not asking that, if we're not going to build an entire huge cabinet on the lot, obviously, because that seems to be out of the reasonableness category. But for what we would be doing in any other provider, it's clear we would have to get our line to that mobile or to that exact mobile home, and do so under certain conditions that are reasonably necessary.
Sure, it just seems that this bill is granting more opportunities for a certain category of tenants than, for instance, other private property owners would have in a subdivision or whatnot. But just some observations, and thank you for the discussion, Ethan, and thank you
You
for the
bet.
opportunity, Mr. Chair.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And I should again want to point, and if I may, Mr. Chair, just to kind of clarify, what we find in the current bill is the language that they should be able to choose fuel furnishings, goods, and services. So I think what we're saying is that without access, you really don't have that choice. You're losing that choice. And so that's just the clarification here, because what we've seen, and it's based on, again, what we've seen, because as you said, there is this delicate balance that we've found as we're trying to deploy fiber. And one of the things that we've noticed is that when we're investing in doing so, investing in an infrastructure, we're looking at obviously whether our service is wanted. But another risk comes when it may be wanted by certain tenants in a mobile home park. But if we can't make sure that even if they choose our service, we can get it to them, then it's really the business sense isn't there. So there's a delay in this infrastructure investment. And again, that's economic balances and not your problem. I see that. It's just kind of one of those consequences of not being able to clarify the language here. Because if we clarify the language that a tenant of a mobile home park has access, as we believe this bill is suited to do, based on the language of choosing, we feel that would obviously help us with our risk, and we'd be more willing to invest in deploying our broadband infrastructure to these mobile home parks, regardless. Sorry, I just wanted to add that.
Sure. Any other questions? Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So how would this either encourage or require utility easements for those lines? I'm not sure what utility easements would already exist in a mobile home park, but I'm guessing for electricity, for gas, those would exist. And then would your services use those same easements?
We would use those, and thank you for that question. Yes, we would use those easements when available. The issues come when it's a developed mobile home park that does not have those easements, or that the easements don't run to the actual mobile home itself. For instance, utilizing the public rights of ways and alleyways when we're deploying fiber throughout normal residential neighborhoods. Obviously, we're able to utilize those utility easements, but we have, and we would use that argument in a mobile home park where a landlord says you're not allowed to come in here. The issues that we've come up with are the ones that don't have the access or the easement to the actual mobile homes. And so we would be literally just kind of landlocked or stuck and not able to provide our fiber, even if one of those tenants chose it. And this goes for all broadband providers. I mean, there would just be no way to get there. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
So, Mr. Chair, I know that this testimony does relate to fiber internet. So that would not probably be the same case for broadband communications that are not with fiber.
Okay, any other questions, committee? Okay, if not, Ethan, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
We don't have any other proponents oral. We do have an opponent oral. So Martha Smith, Executive Director of Kansas Manufactured Housing. Welcome to committee, Martha.
Sorry, thank you. I'm Martha Smith with Kansas Manufactured Housing Association, and KMHA is a statewide trade association. We represent both the manufactured and modular housing industry, and part of our membership, of course, includes mobile home parks. And as you heard, what Senate Bill 169 does is it institutes mandatory access to all mobile home parks to allow the products of cable television, communications, broadband, and telecommunication services to install their equipment or their fiber without permission from the private property owner. By doing that, the landlord cannot ensure that the company has proper licensing. I know Mr. Kaplan just said that they're a public utility. I don't know that that is in fact the case. I would ask I don't know how we find that out, but I have not seen where broadband or fiber is a public utility. So that concerns us with going across private property rights, with us not being able to secure that they're properly licensed, adequate insurance, have pulled the proper permits, all of that on our property where we own all of the easements, and that's an excellent question. Probably, well, the guess is all of our mobile home parks are at least 33 years old or older. So they were probably all built before any of these types of services were broadly available. So our easements, our infrastructure may not accommodate allowing every single provider of these companies access without overloading our infrastructure, causing outages, or basically not having their service perform like they want it to. So that's a concern too. But this does eliminate a key private property right, which is access to property. And I know that there's been a lot of talk about the goal is to protect the tenant. And the FCC does have some protections already in place for the consumer. And in fact, I included the FCC's consumer guide. And I would draw your attention to it's a frequently asked question. It says, is my building an MTE covered by the FCC? And the FCC does come back and says that while they don't have regulatory authority over the landlord, they do have, or landlords can select whoever they want for a provider. And in fact, it says that while a service provider may not enter into an agreement that grants exclusive access to an MTE and MTE property, a landlord may still choose a provider it allows into the building, even if that means only one company provides service. Now, you may ask, what is an MTE? If you look right above that, it says MTEs are defined as commercial or residential premises such as apartment buildings, condominium buildings, shopping malls, or cooperatives that are occupied by multiple entities. MTEs also encompass centrally managed residential real estate developments such as gated communities, mobile home parks, or garden apartments. So this FCC ruling does apply to mobile home parks. And what it says is that we cannot enter into exclusive agreements with a provider, but what we can do is we can select the providers. So when you look at that language and you look at the language in the bill that says the mobile home park has to allow access to every provider, and the FCC is saying you can't go into an exclusive contract, but you can select, your own providers, and it could be one provider. So let's look at a scenario where I own a mobile home park and Cinder Francisco owns fiber optics company. She comes into my mobile home park on Monday and says, hey, next week I'm going to come in and lay fiber all over this mobile home park. You're going to love it. Your tenants are going to love it. It's going to be great. And I say, well, I already have company A, B, and C covering all of my communications, cable needs right now. So Senator Francisco pulls out Senate Bill 169 and says, I'm sorry, but you have to allow us. And I pull out the FCC that says, I get to decide. So we have a conflict between 169 and the FCC. And from what I have found, the FCC does have authority on most of these types of providers, but they specifically trump the state and local authority on broadband. So first of all, the bill takes away key private property rights, the right to access the property. Second, there's a conflict between the FCC and the proposed legislation. Now, I also wanted to mention too that I think there was a question about wiring. The FCC does have a CFR that says, if a resident switches cable providers, a mobile home park cannot block the new provider from using the existing wiring. So the wiring can be used by multiple providers, and that's courtesy of the FCC ruling. And then also, I think there was a question on satellites or antennas, and the FCC also has a ruling on that, and it says that residents have the right to install antennas, satellite dishes, and other reception devices in areas that they have exclusive use of. And for a mobile home park, that would be the mobile home lot. So again, the FCC is looking at protecting the tenants of mobile home parks. Was there any other question that came up that I am missing? I wrote down a few of them, but.
Committee, we got any questions for Martha? San Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the work of equipment from a communication services or broadband may be beyond the wiring to an individual home lot. It would also include, and I think was mentioned in the testimony, the box that provides that. And so this would not give the mobile home park owner any ability to say, where can that box be located?
No.
Any other questions, committee?
Mr. Chair, I have my hand raised.
You do? Well, then I'm going to answer that. Senator Warren, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Martha, for your testimony. And I was wondering the same point when you raised it. This is maybe a question for the revisor. Are broadband carriers, are cable providers, are the fiber networks, are they public utilities with the right, with the authority of eminent domain?
Mr. Myers?
Traditionally, the telecommunications side of those providers is public utility, but then the broadband, the fiber, that side of the business is not a public utility as under the law. Now, oftentimes, that fiber will be carrying both the telecommunications and the broadband service. So there could be a little bit of gray area there with how that exactly operates.
And cable providers are they public utilities with the right to exercise eminent domain?
No, they're not.
Okay, so when public utilities come and want to dig up private property for installation of a public utility, they then also have to provide um, just compensation to the private property owner. And do we wouldn't have that in this instance because the cable provider, broadband provider, fiber, they're not public utilities, right?
They wouldn't be, but that just compensation would be for taking of like an easement or a lease agreement. Um, um, so taking that portion of the land for their public utility use. I'm not sure how these agreements with, in this case, mobile home park landlords would be effectuated. I don't know if that would just be a private agreement or if they would actually, the companies would be actually seeking a lease or easement type of agreement. And certainly, I guess certainly it may be a lease agreement, but then within that, that contract, a landlord could stipulate and put terms and conditions in there relating to damages and reasonable compensation.
So with the bill, then the landlord would be forced into entering into a private contract with the carrier that seeks to provide the services, it sounds like. So just raises more questions about the bill in my mind. So appreciate the discussion. And Martha, a question for you then is, you know, we want to give Kansans the opportunity for this, you know, to live in a mobile park home and be able to access communications that they need. Is the bill, you've mentioned a couple of concerns, and would this be a further concern that then the landlord would have to, I guess, kind of be forced into entering into a private contract?
Absolutely. That, and let's say you have 5 different companies coming onto your property, all of them with different leases, all of them expiring with at different dates, all containing different requirements. That's kind of an administrative issue that probably they're not equipped to handle. In the hearing on the House side, the proponent was asked how many times they have actually been denied access. And what the proponent said is 2 or 3 times over the last 2 years. I have surveyed my members. I have not come across anybody that's denying access. In fact, they're saying, hey, we want our tenants happy. We don't want to lose them. So I have asked Mr. Kaplan for the name of the 2 or 3 parks so that I can make contact with them to find out what's going on, why they would deny the access.
Thank you, Martha, and thank you, Mr. Chair, and Nick as well.
Any other questions, committee? Okay, if
Senator
not,
Fagg. Senator Fagg.
yes,
It's Cindy Holscher. Can I ask a question?
yes, you have the floor, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Martha, my question is this. You kind of touched upon earlier HOAs and some of the parameters in place there. My question is this. We don't allow this type of an arrangement with apartments or townhomes, do we, where we have the situation of various people renting from landlords?
You mean the situation that would be in the bill 169?
Yes, correct. Yes.
Well, they would also fall under the FCC MTE, where they are multi-tenant enterprise or environments. So they would have the right to pick and choose who comes onto their property also.
Okay, yeah, because I'm thinking that competition is probably supposed to address this in some fashion where
Right.
if you have various apartment complexes, some of them are probably going to decide to offer certain services to attract
Right.
people to rent from them. Kind of like you were saying, mobile home, the owners try to do things to keep people there so they don't lose tenants.
Exactly,
Okay,
exactly.
thank you.
Okay, Martha, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
No other proponent, opponent, or neutral testimony has been submitted at this time. Is there anybody else here on any of those three areas? If not, we do have a fiscal note in your file on 169. It's in front of the testimony. So I'm going to close the hearing on Senate Bill 169, and we're going to open the hearing on SB 170. And I'm going to let Mr. Myers, Assistant Revisor, tell us about Senate Bill 170.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Real quick, committee, just a very short bill. It's only half a page on one side of the bill. So Senate Bill 170 amends current statute 66-1227 to authorize the KCC, the Kansas Corporation Commission, to recommend energy efficiency standards for residential, commercial, and industrial structures. So this would maintain the requirement in the current law that the KCC shall not have authority to adopt or enforce any such energy efficiency standards. But as I said, this would explicitly allow the KCC to recommend these energy efficiency standards. And if adopted and enacted, this bill would take effect on July 1, 2025. And I'd be happy to stand for questions, Mr. Chairman.
Committee, we got any questions? Senator Clays.
I'm not sure if this is one you can answer, but I kind of feel like maybe it is. Why would we do this? Can they not recommend it now? Is that the problem?
Oh, the current law states that the Corporation Commission has no authority to adopt or enforce energy efficiency standards.
But recommend?
Yeah, well, this bill would explicitly authorize those recommendations. I don't know if there's something going on to where the KCC doesn't feel like they could recommend, or if there's been any discussions on that, but this would explicitly allow those recommendations.
Yeah, I guess this is all teetering on that word recommend, but then, what's the flip side of that? Because recommend to me just sounds like, hey, that's a good idea, right? But maybe recommend to somebody else means you need to do that. So what are your thoughts on the word recommend?
Well, so the KCC, and under this bill, they could establish specific, or not establish, I recommend, there we go, specific energy efficiency standards for residential, commercial, industrial buildings, and I assume put that out on their website as recommendations. But then the KCC, again, under the current law and under this bill, would not have authority to enforce those standards. So it would be.
Would they be able to encourage it? Like maybe just the opposite, because enforcement usually implies some kind of negative outcome for the person that doesn't do it. Would a recommendation allow them to, create a benefit for people that did do them, which kind of creates the other side of the coin, or not?
I don't think this bill contemplates that. I think this bill is contemplating just a recommendation, something maybe on a website or some information out there, a recommended efficiency standard for a building. But I don't know that they could get into, they don't have authority to adopt or enforce standards, so encouraging might be kind of trending towards that enforcement prong.
Fair enough, thank you.
Committee, Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So currently, the legislature has adopted an energy conservation code. So the recommendation could be to the legislature to reconsider that year of the code that they're adopting. Is that a possibility?
Yes, so you're referring to subsection A. Yes, in the law, there is the adoption of the International Energy Conservation Code, the IECC, from 2006, and that's the applicable energy efficiency standard for new commercial and industrial structures in the state. So yes, certainly the KCC under this bill could recommend updated energy efficiency standard for those buildings, commercial and industrial buildings. But then also this bill would also allow recommendations for residential as well.
But to change that code, the legislature would have to adopt it.
Yes, correct.
Any other questions, committee, for Nick?
I do, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Senator Thompson.
Thank you. Hey, Nick, who sets these standards and codes? Where do they come from?
Ooh, like in subsection A, the International Energy Conservation Code, the IECC. And I'd have to look at the organization. I'm assuming that's some organization that establishes these energy efficiency codes, and then the law captures and adopts that organization's
Okay.
standards that they set.
All righty. I'm always a little bit leery of some of these because I don't know where they're coming from and what their aim is. So thank you, Nick. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Any other questions for Nick? If not, thank you. Okay, first proponent oral is by WebEx. It's Zach Pistora, Kansas Chapter Director of Kansas Sierra Club. Zach, welcome to committee.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, committee. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for the opportunity to testify in favor of Senate Bill 170. As you heard, would add a sentence to Kansas Statute 66-1227 that would allow the KCC to recommend energy efficiency standards. Some of you have heard it from me before on this committee that we see in the Sierra Club as a energy efficiency as a very low cost, low polluting, maybe the most environmentally friendly energy resource that Kansas could have. And many of you might remember and know that Kansas is currently ranked second to last in terms of helping their residents save energy among all states. That's coming from the American Council on Energy Efficient Economy that rank states based on the programs to help their, like I said, residents save energy. This bill seems pretty harmless, but with a great upside potential. It would allow the KCC to just recommend energy efficiency standards. And to the question that was asked committee, we view it as a information sharing. Like the Kansas Water Office provides information to help Kansans save water or help it keep it clean. This would allow the KCC and the State Energy Office to provide some useful information like recommended energy codes to help Kansas homes and businesses to save energy, which fits great with many of all the above energy resources paradigm that many of our legislators and stakeholders kind of abide by. Just a couple things on that, and if you'll look at my testimony, there is a great upside in terms of cost savings, environmental impact, and quality of living that energy codes can help provide. I included some statistics from the Department of Energy in consultation with the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory that says if we were to adopt the 2021 code in Kansas compared to the 2009 code, we could save residents on average about $700 in annual energy costs, or 26% on their bills. We could also create over a life cycle, 30-year period, several $1,000s, estimated $15,000 in energy cost savings. We could reduce harmful emissions to affect asthma rates, respiratory illnesses, and atmospheric pollution, as well as create jobs and helping people save energy. And not too many people know, but a report came out last year about clean jobs in the Midwest. And in Kansas, of all the jobs in the clean energy space, not too many people know that 2/3 of those jobs are related to energy efficiency, helping people save energy and, repairing windows to be more efficient, putting insulation in, redoing HVAC appliances. So it's a real opportunity to help not just folks on the consumer end, whether it's home or businesses, but create jobs in local economies or local communities for folks to help people save energy. And some of you might remember that when we had our electric rate study in 2020, you might remember London Economics did a rate study and ways that we could help achieve regionally competitive rates and reduce electric bills. It was said that energy efficiency could help reduce electric bills. So I included a little element of that in my testimony. And then you also might remember a presentation from the KCC regarding our regional comparison of electric rates. And you might remember it was for monthly bills, Minnesota and Colorado have us beat in terms of their residents paying less per month on their electric bills. And when I looked up their ranking on the energy efficiency, Minnesota was number 10, Colorado was 13th. And they were using less electricity per month than Kansas, respectively. So I thought that was interesting to point out that when we help our Kansas residents save energy, we reduce their monthly electric bills and can create jobs in the process, let alone maybe improve health impacts of the home, more safe structures and resilient structures with more extreme weather. So we just view this as a pretty harmless bill with a great upside. Again, it's not a mandate by the KCC. It's just a recommendation for both policy decision makers, but also the interested public. It fits within the all the above energy policy paradigm, and I think it helped motivate more. It fits in well with the motivation for more affordable housing for the state of Kansas. So, and maybe some of you have already heard, but from residents or constituents that some in your area may be complaining of high electric bills, or other energy bills, $300, $400 a month. If we had some basic standards for housing and commercial buildings going forward, it might be able to help people know that they won't have to pay as much going forward in terms of energy costs. So I'll leave it at that. We encourage you to pass Senate Bill 170 this year and help improve our standing in energy efficiency amongst other states. Appreciate it.
Okay, any questions from committee for Zach? Senator Close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Zach, for coming today. I hope you're still there. I don't see you, but so my question, actually, I have several questions. First of all, I'm all for people lowering their rates by, using some kind of efficiency. You said we were ranked second to last, but that was for helping residents. Do we have a statistic for just like what our energy efficiency is compared to other states? Maybe our residents don't need as much help as other states. So I'm just not sure how helpful that metric is. So I was wondering if you had that. And second, does the Sierra Club, does it provide recommendations for folks like on your website, or do you have any collateral that you send out or anything like that? We actually had some people here protesting the rates in the Capitol recently, and having somebody here to hand those things out to help them lower their rates by doing some efficiency stuff seems like that's a good group to talk to, because they're obviously the most concerned about it. But anyway, I was hoping to maybe get an answer to a couple of those questions.
Yeah, thank you for the questions, Senator. Appreciate it. To the first question, the rankings that the ACEEE does is based on energy efficiency programs, as you point out. That's different than actual energy conserved. My understanding is per capita, we have a higher than average energy use rate. And that information that I typically look at comes from the Energy Information Administration, the EIA nationally. So that's what I know there. I'll say that we've consistently been ranked lower for energy efficiency programs, and regionally, from the energy use comparison, we're one of the, probably middle to the higher average states in terms of kilowatt per hour energy use per residence. To your second question, yes, Sierra Club is very interested. We do everything we can to communicate with our members and supporters, as well as members of the public, in ideas and ways they can help reduce their energy use at their home and business. We've been supportive of our utility programs, like Evergy is rolling out their energy efficiency program that the KCC approved, their Kia programs, and trying to do our best to promote that program, as well as the state of Kansas program, the Kansas new Kansas Home Rebates program that we're looking forward to launching as soon as KCC can get their hands on the money that they're owed from the federal government. So, things like putting up, plastic on leaky windows, to putting insulation in attics and all the rest. One interesting one that we've been a part of have been handing out LED lights, both inside and security lights, into low-income neighborhoods, so they can have both security but also a way to provide efficient energy use for their households. So all those ways to just help get out the education, do a number of public events, Earth Day tablings, etc. to help. So we try the best we can. Sure be great if we could empower the state agencies with legislation like this to help provide some clarity and recommendations of what they think could help residents and businesses save energy too.
Okay. Senator Francisco, you got a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I really appreciate this question about what other states have adopted in terms of an energy code, and that we might be able to ask our research to help us with. But my question would be, we've talked some about energy efficiency, things that you can do, and certainly those are available. But Zach, would you agree that it's easier to make a difference if you're doing it when you're first building the house than when you're trying to rehab or renovate a house?
Yeah, I would think so. That makes a lot of sense to me, and I think builders would agree. Currently exploring the opportunity to build a house for myself and my family, and yeah, they always say it's easier to make those decisions up front than to come back later to do it, and it's also less expensive, I've found out. So there's all that. One thing I learned in kind of researching this topic is that Kansas is one of 8 states that has total home rule jurisdiction, no statewide energy code for residential consumers. And this bill would retain that, provide the home rule, and allow cities and counties to have that responsibility for building codes. But in looking at what other states are doing, many of them provide kind of a baseline energy code for residents. I see a number of them still have codes that kind of go back towards 2009, but then several of them have adopted 2015, 2018, and even newer codes than that. So there's been pretty good data out there. This does help save consumers money when implemented. So I do think this shows a lot of promise for us to help consumers save money, kind of increase universal standards for new builds across the state. And so I'm excited, and without it being a mandate, totally voluntary, offers information, resources at kind of no obligation, but that information could provide some good encouragement and empowerment to help builders and consumers do the right thing.
Another question?
I don't have another question, just a comment that I do know that the legislature has been expending some funds on grants for housing, and it seems like we might even consider what would be a good building code for us to follow, because if we want to have affordable housing, we need utilities that are affordable. And when we're making those expenditures, that could be something that getting some good information would be helpful. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, I think we're done with the questions. Zach, thank you for your presentation. Next, we have opponents oral. Sean Miller, Kansas Building Industry Association. If you didn't fall asleep, Sean, welcome to the committee.
I did not, Mr. Chairman. It's a fascinating conversation. So my name is Sean Miller. I do represent the Kansas Building Industry Association. Very happy to be before you today for those committee members who are here and those who are joining online. Love that we have WebEx and people can do that, although the color's a little bit off. I was asked if I was representing the realtors and if I got this jacket for selling my 100th house. But I am here for the home builders and not the realtors today. So I appreciate the opportunity. I am here to testify in opposition to Senate Bill 170. And I'm not here to testify in opposition to 170 because I don't believe that we should have efficient construction. I certainly believe that we do. Couple things that I'd like to point out today. So number one, we pointed to the 2006 code that is in the statute. We do not have a residential building code. That 2006 code is for commercial and industrial. It's not for residential. So as we look at some of the numbers that say if we move from a 2009 code to a 2021 code, we'll save $700. The vast majority of our jurisdictions are long past the 2009 code already. Some of them are in the 2021, considering the 2024 codes already. And that's really what I'd like to focus on today. Kansas, like several other states in our region, is not unique in the fact that we have a very diverse citizenry. Our counties look a lot different. And so my little quip usually, and I have it in testimony today, is what works in Johnson County may not work in Johnson City. And that primarily is the reason that we don't have a statewide code, because what works in a really heavily population-dense urban area may not be the right fit for a very rural area. What works in a place where flooding is the concern may not be the best fit for something where drought and dust storms is the concern. And so we have allowed a great deal of home rule to deal with these issues. It is true this is a recommended, and in fact, it says the KCC may, so I suppose they could just say, that's nice, we're not going to. I'm not speaking on behalf of the KCC. There is a fiscal note, so I assume they would implement it. My fear is, and I am not a code expert, so let's get that out right up top, but neither are most city council or mayors. That if we have a recommended statewide code, it will become sort of a default easy button, a one-size-fits-all, where a small municipality may say, we don't have a lot of staff, we're not really sure what this is. There's a statewide recommendation, let's carte blanche adopt the statewide recommendation. And that may be a solution that really doesn't fit very well for them. Maybe it is. What we have right now, so that everybody knows at the municipal and county level, is we have a process where those municipalities begin to look at codes, adoptions, maybe one thing for the urban area, another thing for out in the county where it's a little more rural. And we have, in most places, a sort of a petition and a working group process. That may be a codes committee, like it is here within Topeka, where we sit down and we look at the current code and we say, this is designed for high rises in Boston. Let's put this to the side. This doesn't really fit for us, right? There was a question earlier about who develops the IECC, and that is the International Code Council. You can Google them, find them. It's a really broad, diverse membership of cities, municipalities, fire safety, a number of different folks like that, as well as some building trades people. But as they are looking to develop a nationwide code, we see the same issues. A lot of the things that we end up with are developed for San Francisco or New York City because that's where most of the people are. It doesn't fit a Kansas City area because we're so significantly smaller. And so I worry a little bit that having this recommended out there, easy to reach out on the internet, grab and pull down, will limit a lot of our public participation, our back and forth on what may or may not work for our local city or county. So a couple of things that I would like to talk about a little bit. If KCC were to do this, I've peeked ahead at their testimony. I'm not trying to steal their testimony, but they said this, would be a neutral recommendation. It wouldn't recommend fuel source. So is it going to be a single recommendation, or are we going to do an urban recommendation and a mid-sized city recommendation and a small-sized city recommendation and a county outside the zoning area recommendation? It could be a lot more, I think, potentially, if they were to get into that. The other thing that I really want to talk about, and I don't know that anybody on this committee was in our interim committee on affordable housing, but I do think that attainability of housing for the average citizen is a concern right now. It's above the fold in the newspaper. I don't know that newspapers exist anymore, but it's right up there in the headlines on the hyperlinks every day. And yes, our buyers and the people who contract with my builders to build houses are very concerned with efficiency and bringing that cost down. But a lot of times also what we look at is what is the payback on that period. And if I'm going to save $10 a month on electricity, that's a good thing. But if it's going to cost me $10,000 in upfront costs to save that $10 a month in electricity costs, I'm going to need to hang on to that house for a really long time to pay for it. That's an example. That's not a specific. I'm just sort of throwing out a hypothetical, is we have to look at sort of both sides of the cost curve, because I do think that's a really important issue. The proponent talked a little bit too about our energy use in the state of Kansas and how it is higher than everybody else, and seemed to indicate that's possibly because we have an older IECC code. And again, we actually don't have a residential code. But we're also a little bit unique here in Kansas, and one of the reasons I moved here is because I grew up in South Texas, where we have 8 minutes of winter and then we have the rest of summer. We have a full 4 seasons here. We have really hot summers, and on days like today, we have really cold winters. So we're running heaters and we're running air conditioners a lot of the year if you want to maintain a sort of 72 degrees. If you're in northern Minnesota, or if you're in the Rocky Mountain range of Colorado, a lot of those places, if you've ever gone down an Airbnb, they don't even have air conditioners. So if you're looking at an average annualized use of electricity, they're running a heater, and then the rest of the year, they're running nothing. So what would your electric bill look like if it was either warm here all the time and you didn't have to run your heater ever, or if it was cold here all the time and you never had to run your AC? You would see a significantly lower cost of energy. So as we begin to pick data points and look at some of these things, I think there is a lot to consider, a tremendous amount to consider. I think if you go back and you talk to your local communities right now and you ask them, how do you feel about your electric efficiency codes? Is the process working? Are you getting input from residents, from homeowners, from builders? Most of them will say that they are at the current point, and we can sort of step in and say, this might not be the right fit, and they can say, okay, we appreciate your concern, but we're going to do it anyway in the name of efficiency. So we have a really good local process that works right now, and I would encourage us to not upset that. So I would encourage you to oppose Senate Bill 170. I'm happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time, and I thank you again for allowing me to address you today.
Okay, thank you, John. Committee, got any questions? Senator Clays.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for coming today. And that is a very nice jacket, both in the picture and otherwise. But listen, here's my thing, and I'll tell you what I like about this, and you tell me where I'm going off the rails a little bit. But I like the idea of just a recommended standard, and I'll tell you why. I think most humans like to use cognitive shortcuts where, you look at something and, it's a brand name, and so you can trust the brand name. It's the Toyota truck. I mean, they make a darn good truck, and, you just know that, versus maybe somebody that just came along and made a new one. And, when I think about something like a UL standard or the rest of those, you can just look at it and know. And I've built 2 houses, not with my hands, but, worked with contractors to build houses. And there's a lot of decisions you got to make. And, some of them deal with efficiency. And it just seems to me as a consumer that, if I knew my house met some basic standard, whatever it was, that, I might feel a little more comfortable about buying that house or something like that. And, if that is indeed what the KCC is trying to do, is just trying to, put out some recommendations on some basic standard, and then the realtor can say, this meets the KCC, standard, that might actually be a good thing. Tell me where I'm going off the rails on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator. I don't think you're going off the rails at all. But if you live in the greater Sedgwick County area, you already have that, because they have a Metro Building Code Authority. They have developed, and what I assume this would be is, here's our recommended code. This is potentially a floor. You're still going to have all of those questions from your contractor who says, here's the requirement, but this light fixture is going to be this much more efficient, or if you want to go from this level of insulation to this level of insulation, it's going to be that much more efficient. I think you're going to still have all of those questions. Perhaps if you are in a county that has no zoning and no codes, you might be in that place. If you are in a county that in 2025 has no zoning and no codes, my guess is they're probably not going to adopt the recommended one either, because they've chosen not to have one for some reason. So theoretically, you're going to have a floor or a recommended level there, but I still think city by city, place by place, you're going to have all sorts of different metrics. We see that in Johnson County particularly, quite frankly. Johnson County's nice and tight, and it's very well developed, but if you cross from one street to the other, you probably go from one town to the other, and you completely change whatever their code is as you simply cross the street. And so that creates a lot of confusion for builders as well. But we're able to work through that process. We're able to work with those local communities to kind of address that. So I don't think you're off out of bounds at all or off base. I just don't think that having this is going to change any of the questions or concerns that you're going to have as you work with your builder on house number 3.
Okay. I got 2 more questions, and then we'll go on here. Senator Thompson has one, so Senator Thompson, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your testimony. My big concern is this. First of all, these are international energy conservation codes from 2006. How up to date is that? And first of all, do we feel comfortable abdicating recommendations from an international agency rather than setting domestic policy on these sorts of codes? To me, it sounds like another way to introduce green energy policies that are already costing us dearly. Would you agree?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, I appreciate your question. So your first question, I believe, was how do we feel about the 2006 code? And again, I would remind you, in my testimony I mentioned, but I didn't say it out loud, I am not trying to weigh in the commercial industrial side today. I represent the residential home building industry, and so that 2006 code applies only to commercial and industrial. We do not have a statewide residential code. We allow that to be handled at the local level. And by and large, most of our jurisdictions have much more modern codes than that. In regards to the International Codes Council, it is an International Codes Council. This is a bit of a generalization, but I would tell you primarily that it is sort of a North American Codes Council. We deal with a lot of cross-border things out of Canada. You will hear oftentimes us talk about lumber and why we have lumber issues in places, and we simply can't go buy in Sweden because Sweden uses the metric system, and Canada will mill lumber to our inches and feet that we deal with here in the U.S. So that question is probably one that I'm not familiar enough to answer with. The ICC is a relatively generally accepted standard across the U.S. There are a couple of other U.S.-based code councils that people look at and utilize in certain jurisdictions. But I think the one-size-fits-all of big cities to rural is typically more of a concern for us than the international nature of this particular code.
Okay. Well, that answers the question. I appreciate that, and I do think that, it's you can't do a one-size-fits-all, and you've got issues with costs that are not considered when you get a top-down type code like this. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Holscher, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, Sean, my question is this. You mentioned earlier there's a difference between rural and urban. And of course, that comes down to scale. I mean, obviously, if you're comparing New York City to rural Kansas, that's a huge difference. If you're comparing Overland Park, Kansas to rural Kansas, not quite that big of a gap. But I guess my question is this. There's no mandates. This is just communication. And so I have to think those smaller municipalities are smart enough to know the difference in needs and what that looks like around their rural areas versus more urban areas. And that really, to me, this is just a conversation starter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator. I tend to agree. I think it has started a conversation. That's why we're here today, so I appreciate that. A lot of it is related to density, as you discuss. I think that obviously I use sort of two ends of the spectrum there as I talked about New York City, but I do think there is still a very significant difference from some of the highly dense areas in Johnson, Wyandotte, Sedgwick counties in particular, and areas in particularly the western third of the state. I do think it's a conversation starter. I think the word recommend is a unique one, and And so we say, we're going to recommend, but there's no requirements that anybody use them or pay attention to them. And yet, if we don't expect people to use them or pay attention to them, why do we do them and put them out there as a recommendation in the first place? I think they're going to just be the way that a community reaches out and grabs it, drops it into their code, and then sort of sidesteps the really important remainder of the process, which can be 4 to 6 months to a year of going back and forth in these local code councils to determine line by line, right? The 2021 IECC, I think I haven't looked at it in a while, 289, 290 pages, somewhere in there. And it's not a large print King James Bible, right? Like pretty small print. And so going through each and every one of those sections to determine, is this something that works for my local county or my local place? And then walking through each of those is a pretty important step, I think, as we do that. So the IECC puts out a new code essentially every 3 years, right? It's 2006, 9, 12, 15, all the way up to 24 now. If that is just sort of going to be the standard, is every 3 years we look at it, then I don't know why we need to spend $40,000 to hire a consultant to say that we need to update this by 3 years because the IECC has done it. You can Google 2018, 21, 24 IECC codes today, and it pops up really, really fast. And I think that's there for cities and counties to look at. So I appreciate your point, and I agree with you. It's a recommendation. There's nothing mandated in here. I worry a little bit about how it might change the local collaborative process.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Miller. I'd like to point out to the committee, there's opponents written. We've got a Mark Toom, VP of Government Affairs, Kansas Association of Realtors, and another opponent that was Martha Smith, Executive Director of Kansas Manufactured Housing. So at this time, we'll move into neutral oral, and I don't see Lynn here. Oh, she's on WebEx, okay. So Lynn, you're on WebEx. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, Vice Chair Peterson, Ranking Minority Member Francisco. In the interest of time and the fact that I also have a 3 o'clock to jump to, we are neutral on this bill. The one thing I do want to point out is that the KCC Energy Division has a approved project through our DOE funding around this kind of around this topic. What we had proposed doing was looking at the various codes across the state for both residential, commercial, and industrial to kind of get a look of the landscape across the state and the various codes that are being implemented. We would then look at various building code best practices and try to identify best practices for all 3 sectors. What I want to stress here is because of the commission and the quasi judicial role that the commission plays, we would not look at anything with an agenda. We would have to stay fuel neutral. We would not incentivize anything that would encourage fuel switching from that dynamic. So it would kind of be from a best practices, trying to provide educational information on various sectors and what's out there and the benefits to the various building codes. So with that, I would stand for questions.
Okay, thank you, Lynn. Is there any quick questions for her? Anybody on WebEx? Okay. Lynn, I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, is there any other proponents, opponents, or neutral at this time? Okay, if not, there is a fiscal note on SB 170 in front of the testimony. And at this time, I'll close the hearing on SB 170 and open a hearing on SB 171. Nick, if you'd give us an update on that, I would appreciate it.
Yep. Certainly, Mr. Chairman. So committee, it's not too often, and I don't recall any other time where this committee's been looking at a bill dealing with Chapter 48 of the Kansas statutes annotated, and specifically Article 16. So this area of law that this bill is amending concerns nuclear energy development and radiation control. And just very high level, the general purpose of this set of statutes, it's outlined in 48-1602. These statutes are generally to protect the public health and safety, to promote the orderly state and federal regulation relating to radiation control, and to establish procedures for the byproduct, source, and special nuclear materials and radiation-producing devices. So the entity that, the state agency that oversees these statutes is the Kansas Department of Health and Environment. And this bill would amend 2 of the statutes within this radiation protection and control statutory scheme. So Section 1 of the bill, this would amend the definition statute, KSA 48-1603, and it would include a definition for fusion system within the law, and you'll see why that's important here in a sec. But in the bill, if you look, you can look on page 4 of the bill, and that is where the definition for fusion system would occur. Any of the other changes that are occurring within that definition section are simply technical updates, since this statute has not been amended for a little bit. So here's where that definition for fusion system would come into play. So Section 2 of the bill establishes certain licensure, registration, and the associated fees that are associated with that licensure and registration for nuclear and radiation control measures. And so this section would establish a specific license category for fusion systems as it's defined in the bill. So this would be in the bill applied as a maximum annual licensure fee up to $40,000 for a fusion system license. And then Section 2 of the bill would also authorize the Secretary of the Department of Health and Environment to assess late fees. And this would not only be for just the fusion system license, this would be for all the licensure categories that you see on pages 5, 6, and 7 of the bill, 6, 7, 8. So pages 5 through 11 of the bill, all those licensure categories. This Section 2 would authorize the Secretary to assess late fees for any licensure or registration that has expired, and the person who is subject to that licensure or registration has not timely paid their fees. So what this section would do for the late fees is, if a license or registration is renewed 1 to 30 days after its expiration, this bill would authorize the Secretary to assess a maximum late fee in an amount not to exceed 25% of the license or registration fee. And then if that license or registration is renewed 31 days or more following the expiration of the license or registration, this would authorize the Secretary of Health and Environment to impose a maximum late fee in an amount not to exceed 50% of the license or registration fee. And Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, if enacted, this bill would take effect upon publication in the statute book, which is July 1, 2025, and I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Committee, we got any questions for Nick on this? Senator Clays.
Yeah, as I look over all those license fees, it seems like this one is a bit of an outlier. Why are we at 40 on this one?
I think that's a good question, and I might leave that to the proponents to answer. That they might be able to speak to why that value was proposed.
Any other questions? Senator Pat.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Along that line, are there other fees in statute that don't relate to KDHE that would be even close to $40,000, to your knowledge?
Ooh, I'm not sure. This is a specific, this licensure and registration area is a specific category relating to nuclear and radiation control. So it might not be a apples to apples comparison if we're looking at just general other licensure categories, but I'm not aware of any. I'd have to look. I'd have to look to see what's out there.
We may find out from KDHE. And then the second question, you indicated that we currently have no late fee. KDHE has no late fee, so this would just now establish late fees for all of these licensures?
That is my understanding, that this bill is establishing that late fee section, and you can see it on page
11.
Yes, thank you, Senator Peck. Yes, page 11, subsection F there, that's the late fee. So I assume they don't have authority, or they've interpreted this as not providing them authority under current law to assess late fees, and this would provide that authority for them to do so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions, committee? Okay, Nick, thank you. Next, we have a proponent, oral, Jason Manhold, Radiation Control Program Director, Kansas Department of Health and Environment. Jason, welcome to committee.
All right, thank you. Chairman Fagg and House members, or honorable members of the Senate Committee on Utilities. My name is Jason Meinholt. I'm the Radiation Control Program Director at the Kansas Department of Health and Environment. Thank you for the opportunity to speak in favor of Senate Bill 171. SB 171 will allow the Department of Health and Environment to create a licensing structure and fees for the establishment of nuclear fusion systems in the state. This bill will allow the agency and the state of Kansas to be ready to better implement the necessary measures needed to license these technologically advanced systems in our state. This future-thinking measure will help us address the challenges other states have faced when it comes to creating licensing and regulations to oversee the establishment of these systems. Ongoing advancements in power generation technologies are advancing rapidly, with the industry nearing the realization of nuclear fusion systems. On April 14th, 2023, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission voted unanimously to regulate nuclear fusion systems under its existing byproduct materials regulations while introducing limited scope rulemaking. Although the NRC maintains sole authority for the licensing and inspection of nuclear fission reactors, so I want to elaborate the difference there. This decision grants NRC agreement states such as Kansas the authority to license nuclear fusion systems in accordance with state rules and regulations. At present, Kansas does not have a specific licensing fee category for nuclear fusion systems, which may involve highly complex license applications. Nuclear fusion systems vary significantly in size and technical scope, often requiring extensive staff time, potentially hundreds or thousands of hours to process licensing. Given these complexities, the agency would create a reasonable fee structure for the various types, sizes, and scopes of these nuclear fusion systems based off of the complexity, the size of the system, and the time it takes to license up to the maximum cap established in the statute if the bill were to pass. Additionally, this bill will allow the ability of the agency to add additional fees on late renewals of registrations and licenses, which has been a growing concern within the program. For example, in state fiscal year 2024, nearly 10% of radioactive materials licensees and 20% of X-ray device registrations were submitted late. Currently, the only means we have to respond to late fees is through enforcement action, which is a time-consuming and costly process for both the agency and for licensees and registrants. It's the agency's intent that by establishing these measures, it will encourage timely renewals and result in few, if any, late fees assessed. For these reasons, we ask for your support and passage of SB 171. I thank you for your time and allowing me to speak, and I'll stand for questions.
Committee, any questions? Senator Clays.
So, do you want to opine on the 40,000? And I mean, the late fee sounds like a good idea. Probably should have had that a long time ago. But well, that 40,000 is about 4 times higher than any other fee you guys have on that schedule. What's up with that?
That's correct. So that number, and that actually may be wildly underestimating what the time it's going to take to license these. So these are, as you can probably imagine, very cutting-edge technologically advanced devices with a lot of different nuances to each one based on the varying technologies that there are. I have in the past spoken with my counterparts in other states that have actually licensed these facilities without an adequate fee structure, and they have given me some rough estimates on what they think a cost should be, and this is in line with what they estimate. So that's where that comes from. And of course, I want to recommend or reiterate that this is just a maximum. It is the agency's intent to explore a more definitive fee under regulation, possibly even up to just an hourly rate based on actual cost up to the maximum value there. In my conversations with industry representatives, they have mentioned that regulatory certainty is of utmost importance to them as they develop these systems. And by putting a definitive cap in there, it does provide some level of certainty for the industry.
Senator Pack.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is an annual fee. So you're going to try to convince us that every year it's that challenging to renew a license? I understand that ever so often it might take a lot of hours, but every year?
So again, this goes back to the nuance that will be defined in regulation upon passage of this bill. And with that hourly rate structure, that is what we currently intend to implement. If it doesn't take us very much time in subsequent years, we will only charge up to the amount of time that it takes us to process any amendments or perform any inspections associated with these facilities.
Okay, I hear you say that today, and that's great. But what about 10 years from now when there's a totally different personnel is a concern that I would have. Now, I see in the late fee portion that the secretary may. That means they may not. And so why would we say may rather than shall? That's permissive because he might charge you, but he's not going to charge me because I've got more hair on top of my head.
That I would have to reach back to my legal team to get an answer for you, and I will certainly do so, Senator.
Okay. And it says, so it just, Mr. Chairman, looks like on the late fees, which I understand, that's fine, but it says a may not to exceed. So it looks like that the secretary has wide discretion to not, and then they could choose whatever level they wish on late fees. So I have a little concern with that and but in any event, we'll work the bill another day. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Committee, any other questions? Any on WebEx? No, Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the comments from the senator, particularly with that issue of an initial fee. So I'm wondering if the department might consider what would be a fee to implement the system and an ongoing annual fee, and if there are any other devices or special projects or licenses that would also be appropriate. If you could just take a little time on the rest of this snow day to look at that, I'd appreciate any comments.
Certainly. Thank you.
Okay, we have any other questions from the committee? Okay, Jason, thank you. At this time, we have no other proponents, opponents, or neutral testimony that's been submitted. So there is a fiscal note on SB 171 in front of the testimony, and I will close the hearing on SB 171. Is there any announcements from the committee? I'm sorry to hold you over so long today. It was some interesting stuff, so it was interesting. I will be working SB 92 tomorrow, so be sure and be here if we can on that. So with that, the meeting's adjourned. Thank you.